So hi everyone, and welcome to this third discussion as part of the Provocations, Conversations, Iterations series at SlowMoco. And this is part of a series of events in the Provocations Project organized by Jessica Rajko, Jean-Marc Matos, and myself, Teoma Naccarato. And a couple of years ago in 2018, we launched an open call for provocations on the question of what escapes computation in interactive performance. And the full collection of provocations is online, but presently in the context of SlowMoco, we wanted to revisit some of these provocations. So we are inviting a few provocateurs here at a time with us to discuss their provocations in relation to one another. And we are thrilled to have here with us today, Evelyn Ficarra, Adam Russell, and Jean-Marc Matos. We'll begin by inviting each person to share and reflect back on their provocations, and then we're going to move into some more open discussion. So I will hand it over to Evelyn to begin.
Okay, hello everybody. I want to apologize if it gets noisy here. I live on a very busy road, so sorry about that. Thank you all for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure to be involved and to revisit this material. So I'm going to more or less read out, oops, sorry, dropping things. I'm going to more or less read out my provocation and probably interrupt myself a bit. I found that I've been both kind of pedantic and a little bit rambling in this, so it's an interesting combination of approaches, I think. Escapes is not fully explained by computation, is ambiguous on some level, its origins multivalent or unclear, so I basically go through every word and try to figure out what they mean. Computation, calculation, usually to do with mathematics, often with the use of computers, but not necessarily, as in the colloquial phrase, that does not compute. Interactive. Interaction can happen on many levels, chemical, electronic, emotional, physical, implies communication of some kind, possibly following a set of rules, algorithms, or expectations. Audience presence at a traditional performance is arguably already interactive. Even if all the audience does is watch, listen, and applaud. Human performers will feel different if the audience is there compared to performing to no one. Performance implies audience, even an audience of one, even if the performer and the audience are the same person. We can perform ourselves in everyday life. According to Judith Butler, we perform our genders. There are also more formal performances where we buy tickets and watch, experience art involving live performers. Can a machine perform? Yes, if there's an audience. Can the machine be its own audience? Yes. Is a machine always performing? Probably. I'm interested in your response to that one particularly. If I watch a machine performing and I'm the only person in the audience, is that interactive? Even if nothing I do alters the performance? Yes, the quality of my attention and of my projections of meaning onto the machine makes it interactive. What escapes computation in interactive performance? Human presence, subjectivity of human presence, emotional interaction, bonding between performers and audience, between audience members. The gaze escapes computation. Listening escapes computation. Moving in the fullness of the experience of moving escapes computation, though elements of it can be broken down and understood in terms of math and physics. What escapes computation in interactive performance? Thinking it through, I'd have to say almost everything. And I'll hand over to number 2, which I think is Adam.
Thank you, Evelyn. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the context of my provocation from 2018, which was alluded to through the video link on the provocation site to a work I was heavily involved in 2017 and 2018 with the choreographer Sarah Levinsky, which tried to present dancers with recently recorded traces of their own movement through a video wall that acted as a kind of live memory. But the interesting thing for me about this project was that we were using the gesture following tech that had been developed at IRCAM Paris, which was usually used in a supervised mode where you knew what the categories were you were trying to recognize in advance, and you trained your system to do online recognition of, oh, you're doing that movement right now. And one of the things that attracted to me about this was that it could do that recognition while the movement was occurring. But what we wanted to do was to do unsupervised learning, in the sense that the system in Tools That Propel, this work with Sarah is called Tools That Propel, doesn't have any preordained categories of movement. And it starts to form categories as it's presented with movements, and develops a vocabulary on the fly with a performer. And the interesting thing for me about that was the dialogue then between the machine's attempt to categorize what you are doing and the performer's confrontation with their own repeating patterns, and their perhaps instinct to work with those patterns again or escape from them in their own movement. In fact, the original version of Tools That Propel was about encouraging the performer to escape from the machine's representations of what they were doing. I'm not going to go into the bugs and stuff here, I mean now, because there isn't time, but that was the context of the provocation. Oh, sorry, I should say, I believe I should hand over to Jean-Marc now for our third provocation. Sorry.
It's all right. Thank you. Thank you, both of you, Evelyn and Adam. Find your proposal, your provocation, quite inspiring. If I recall, I was searching for, in fact, an answer that would be somehow concentrated in some artistic works that I've been doing in these recent years, around 17, 18. And one in particular, which in fact was based on the idea of how to create an environment, which in this case, it's an installation mediated by a performer called Body Fail, which is basically somehow kind of related to what you just said, Adam, which was the idea. It was to confront a human being, let's say, even though the installation is mediated by a performer, it's addressed to anyone who wants to experiment the system. The neural network had been programmed to recognize somehow the very slight differences between habitual movements, which are sort of formal, symmetrical, done in, let's say, in a continuous flow, more or less a way that we all move in the public space, which is always sort of, constrained within social bound signatures. And the idea was to see precisely how a computer system could devise those very slight differences, and in a way, see how we could position ourselves at the very border in between what a computer can recognize and what a computer cannot recognize. And in the process of making that piece, we realized how difficult that was. Not only on the way that programming a neural network requires a tremendous amount of time, not so much, well, computer power, of course, but a lot of time. And depending on many, many different sets of parameters, you can orient the result in different directions. But what was very interesting also is to see how people experiencing the installation realize for themselves how somehow engaging it is to put yourself a little bit away or slightly on the side, on the wild side of that sidewalk where you're bound to be doing all kinds of habitual movements. So in a way, I sort of realized while I was writing this little provocation that the theme itself is an escape from computation somehow, at least an attempt. Exactly. Yeah. I want to stop here because I think I would like to say a lot more, but I keep it short.
I think that idea of escape is really interesting. That's one of the things. I mean, I think the question is a really resonant question, and one of the reasons is that word escape.
Absolutely. And the kind of question that came back to my mind earlier when I was preparing for this meeting we're having connects with some reading I did a couple of days ago, where some sort of prospective writing was putting up questions about where do the technology will take us in 1,000 years from now. And I was thinking that the way we look at things right now, it seems to me as if we're in the present time, we're positioning ourselves in regards to what the technology can do. And it's from that we conclude that a lot of what we experience, what we live in the phenomenological sense of the word, does escape computation. But in 1,000 years, I'm not that sure that what you refer to, Evelyn, like the gaze, the listening, or the experiential moving will not be computed. I mean, we see already how the progress of the technology makes it kind of potentially possible to do compute, gaze, listening, feeling, emotional feelings, and so on and so forth. So, well, I just was interested by that question.
Yeah, I think that's really a really good point. And I think even already there's a lot to argue against when I say about that. You know, there's plenty of algorithmic listening goes on, and computers can hear stuff. You just have to tell them what to hear. But I think what I meant is that as humans, we come to our listening experience and our moving experience and our watching with the whole history of ourselves. And there's a complexity and richness to that. Our interactions with other people, our, you know, where we were born, you know, there's such a richness and complexity that what I think that probably does escape computation. And if it doesn't, then it's just kind of, what can you do with all that data anyway?
I had a much the same reaction, Evelyn, as Jean-Marc did to your provocation, that these, in what I had written in preparation, in what ways did this list of things that escape do so? Subjectivity, emotion, gaze, listening, and so on. And it's not that I don't think that they do. I very much agree with you. And so the interesting question for me is, in what way would that future technology, which encompasses all of those things, still fail to capture what we're talking about? And you also said, Evelyn, moving in the fullness of the experience of moving escapes. And that to me is the key, I think. It's that holistic dimension that any future technology would still lack, perhaps.
Perhaps.
But is that even the right question? Because, I mean, we can already experience moving in the fullness of our moving. And so what does it matter whether computation can compute that or not? So I don't know. I guess my bar for interactivity is very low. I kind of think everything's interactive on some level, on some scale, on some time scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've enjoyed reading through the Discord discussions about these provocations. Garrett Johnson, is that right? Made a really interesting point about, Hubert Dreyfus's What Computers Can't Do. He said, Dreyfus doesn't tell us what computers can do. And here there's excitement, joy, ecstasy, in conjunction with that which escapes computation.
Mm.
In other words, this sort of cyborg interaction can be very productive, and the computer doesn't need to encompass all these things that we're worrying it doesn't encompass, right?
I had a question, if I may. For Jean-Marc, in your original provocation, you talk about making the computer crash. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that and what you like about making the computer crash.
Well, simply we simulate the crashing via the treatment of the resulting image that the audience conceive themselves, combined with the sort of deconstruction of the sound. In other words, when you initiate your experience with the installation, you have a sort of clean digital image of yourself, and that sort of virtual mirror of your own gets dismantled, distorted, destructed, and more fuzzy the more you move in an unhabitual way, and it's combined with the sound. And if you, within the timetable that it's given for you to experience the system, because it goes into loops and cycles, when you reach that point of the so-called crashing, you put everything back to zero after seeing a very poor image of yourself, corresponding to the image that the sort of the eye of the computer sees of you, which is a very sort of little stick figure reduced to just the main character of the transcription given by the camera itself. It's in that way that we called it crash. I mean, we don't literally destroy the computer. It's not like our astronaut in Space Odyssey who does bring Hall to the very end, but in a way we were thinking about that as a reference somehow. It's a matter of emptying the memory.
It's just interesting to me, this idea of crashing and death in a way, and you know, thinking about computer games as well, where often you die in a computer game, right? But then you get resurrected because you can just start over again and keep playing. And I'm just interested in that whole aspect of working with computers, the notion of death.
Right.
And resurrection, I guess.
And resurrection. Yeah, I mean that encompasses many philosophical questions in a way. If I somehow also bring it back to the other part of the question, interactive performance. I mean, of course, I don't know where we are up to today in the so-called interactive performance. I don't know about you. Are you experiencing some type of works that deal with interactive performance, with distributed sensors and so on and so forth? Are you in touch with artistic and research-oriented projects that deal with interactive performance mediated by computation?
Not so much.
Okay. And you, Adam, are you?
Well, in my case, I feel see, this is a very interesting thing for me to come back to this, because I was heavily involved in the MoCo space, if you like, 4 years ago, but felt that what I was really interested in wasn't physical bodies and dance as such. But there was something about choreography which I was kind of trying to take into an epistemological space. Anyway, it's a long story, but the point is, because of that, I kind of flirted with this space and then moved away from it to an extent. And I'm not currently involved in this kind of work.
Okay.
I would say
Yeah,
that,
sorry.
I would say that the question is intentionally framed in a broad sense, that it has brought the three of you here into this room. And one thing that Evelyn, that I think you did really effectively in your provocation is widen for yourself what you mean by interaction. And when I think about your work as a composer, I think about the teacup, the installation with the teacups on the table that I saw, which for me is absolutely interaction. But I feel like there's an interesting sort of thread going on that is associating the notion of escape with that of failure and success. And Jean-Marc, in the title of your piece, you have body fail. So in a sense, failure is attributed to a body, but also we're talking about the crashing of the computer. And Adam, in the title of, is it of the video or of your provocation, you have the term failure in Chrome.
Oh, yeah. So that's actually an interesting coincidence that didn't come from us. That was the title of an online pavilion as part of the Wrong Biennale that we were participating in. Yeah.
Okay,
In
but
fact,
I feel like there
really
is a thread about this attached to the notion of interactivity, escape, computation.
Right. I mean, that's a really interesting point for me, because the work is called Tools That Propel, which is a phrase that came from Sarah Levinsky. And she was talking about wanting a relationship with digital tools in a dramaturgical context in the dance studio that propelled the performers into new ideas or new gestures. And this back and forth of attempts to categorize, which perhaps fail in some sense, was very much not seen as a negative thing for us. It wasn't a failure. It was a way of propelling new movement.
I thought both of your pieces, both Jean-Marc and Adam, both of those pieces looked really great, actually.
Well, they do have something in common, that's for sure. We so often, I mean, within certain fields of psychology and so on, and treatment of mental diseases and bodily expressions, we look at the failure of body in a very particular way, you know, so that somehow putting forward the fact that by expressing movements that are not particularly appealing or correct, you know, can also have a positive impact in the world and the environment we live in. And that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to relate to also in a way, because it's directly linked with the piece that I just finished last Friday. It's called Gameplay Level 2. I've been in connection with many questions that came from the audience member. We had a talk at the end and so on and so forth. Was that, and it's an interactive performance, so to speak. Let me say two words, with some optical tracking and so on and so forth, with very, very simple visual material and sound material in order to focus really on the relationship that these two dancers, two dancers are experiencing different relationships depending on the behavior of these virtual creatures. Some of them are semi-autonomous or linked to some semi-life of themselves. And the question that was really there was somehow, I don't know if that connects with our talk on provocation, was how do we deal with very set levels of constraints and rules in order to perhaps not so much make the system fail, because that perhaps is particularly utopic, but how do we still try to frame for ourselves levels of freedom inside of a very set environment? And in this case, every tableau of this piece has very set rules, and the interaction leads you into behaving in a certain way. So once that it's set, The question is, how do we still find our little chunks of freedom inside? Are these provocations? I don't know. I doubt. I guess I mean, we try by provoking, but in fact, what we're seeking, what we're looking for is to find and to construct these little pieces of utopia inside of the world we live in. Again, I'm on a very general level.
Looking for these moments of freedom makes me think of the word escape again. So it's almost like we're coming full circle back to that idea.
Yeah.
And I think the framing is interesting, isn't it? That sometimes we think of finding freedom inside these systems of constraint, and other times we talk about attempts to mechanically capture as falling inside the larger whole of what is happening. And I kind of feel that those two images are really just saying the same thing. They're what mathematicians might view as a circle inversion of inside and outside. And as I think Teoma actually posted on the Discord, the question is, what is this everything that we're, if we cannot capture everything, what is this everything? And this recurring theme of excess is key for me. It's I'm not sure what I'm trying to say now. My apologies.
But I mean, for me, everything includes memory and history and all of that. And so I feel like a lot of interactivity is more to do with like the present moment, or how we're intervening in the present moment, which is also important. And I know, interactive systems also build up their own kind of histories and memories as well. So it's not either or. But
yeah. Thank you for mentioning memory, because this is for me that's it. It's that a movement is full of potential which isn't entirely realized in a given moment and keeps on going over time. And our memory of that movement is the continuation of that movement. For example, you could think of this series of provocation events around MoCo as an unfolding movement, which is still happening. But that, we may not have time to talk about that.
I like that. I like that.
Nice. It's a nice thought.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice.
It's interesting you bring up this notion of excess, because in one of our previous conversations, and I'm starting to see threads between them, Garrett brought up the idea, or just said, what exceeds computation, which I thought was an interesting sort of rephrasing. And then I think there's a sort of follow-up question of, if something exceeds our capacity for computation, how do we know? Or how would we know that something exceeded?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that we can't necessarily know, but we often feel. You can feel when something is pregnant with something you can't quite name that is still happening. Anyway.
I feel like that points maybe to the effects of that, which exceeds. I think this is perhaps a really beautiful moment to bring this to a close. There's so much more to say and to discuss, and I really appreciate how threads from different conversations and from Discord are starting to mix with one another. And we're super appreciative that you are here to share with us. We want to keep the conversation going through Discord and online. And thank you so much, Evelyn and Jean-Marc and Adam.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank all of you.
Thank you very much. You too.